If you've ever caught yourself thinking, I will never let that happen again, that's a rule book moment. And it sounds protective, but it's really policing yourself into smallness and giving yourself this checkbox of all of these things to follow, and it's you exuding control. After chaos, after abuse, after big lessons learned and really hard times, many women, myself included, have tried to write invisible rule books to feel safe, to protect themselves, to keep from making a mistake again when they're being hard on themselves. I've done it. And I think the reason that it plays such a big role is because we think if we have more control, we can create more safety, we can stay strong in a situation, and we can muscle through it or get through it in a specific expected way. But that's the thing, is we can't control life, we can't control outcomes, we can control what we do, but it's not about policing ourselves, it's not about living by a checklist. That's not living in the present moment. That's actually living based on your past. That's living in a program. You're pre-programming yourself to behave a certain way instead of accepting lessons and moving forward and carrying that. So that's what I want to talk about in today's episode. This episode will show you why rules don't create safety and how to anchor back into yourself instead. So let's talk about rule book energy. We've already kind of talked about it a little bit, but the definition of a rule book is a set of self-imposed laws meant to prevent future pain. That's what that is. That's why we do it. And so we do it out of a survival reflex of, if I can control everything, maybe I won't get hurt again. Or we do it out of a trauma reflex. If I make the rules for myself, I'll finally be right or enough. Whether it's enough to keep the certain partner, or I'll be right instead of continually being told that I'm wrong, or maybe I'll be enough and somebody will choose me and love me. But the hidden cost of all of this is that the rules shrink the possibility of anything that can happen. They keep us in this box. They tell us, don't love too much, don't trust, don't need, don't speak, don't do all of these things. And so now we're having to go through that entire workflow before we act, instead of simply being our authentic selves. We're putting more strain on ourselves and preventing us from fully expressing anything, because maybe we think we're too much, or because we think that we're not enough. Rules are punishments. They are not protection, even when they are intended well. And they control us out of fear instead of anchoring into our own strength. We fear that whatever situation that came up that gave us that rule in the first place, we fear that that will come up again. And so then now we have this rule that will prevent this thing from happening. But what it does is everything that we've already talked about. It just mutes your life and it shrinks you. And it keeps you on guard and in defense mode. Because when you're constantly going through all of these things, you're in this state of control. You're not free flow, you're not creative, you're not going with the flow. You are exerting control and you are being directive. And that's a very masculine energy. And I've talked about how there is a balance between the masculine and the feminine. If we have a hard time, we swing from one end to the other and we go into extremes, but we have this balance, and we have to have a balance of masculine energy and feminine energy. Now, where you fall on that spectrum and what feels good for you may vary, but you're going to have some masculine traits, some feminine traits. I want to share a personal story about when I exuded rules on myself. I exuded this rule book to prevent from something happening again. And I had just gotten out of a relationship I had been broken up with. And he told me, Caitlin, this, and this are the problem. And I was so upset with myself. I put myself into a shame spiral. I just blamed myself for everything. And I wrote down in my journal, and everything was about self-blame. Yes, I can take responsibility for it. I can make sure that I take those lessons into the future. But what I was doing was I ended up creating this rule book of, I will never do this again. I will never do this again. I will always do this in this scenario. And what happens? That's creating rules to live by out of fear of something happening again, instead of taking this experience and learning from it. And what I could have learned is, when I get really busy, I don't check in on somebody. I'd like to just practice pausing and taking a minute to check in and see how my partner's feeling. I know I can get really focused. And what I did instead was I will check in with my partner every single day. I will not overly focus on work. I will do all of these things, and I made these checklists, and it was a punishment to myself rather than a gift for the future. And I think it's different intentions and different ways of thinking about it, and it comes across extremely differently. Because if I'm in a shame spiral and I'm blaming myself for everything, how do you think those rules are going to land when I go back and revisit them? Maybe I'm having issues in a future relationship where I've been working a lot and I've been a little bit out of touch. If I go back and I read my shame spiral and I start implementing these rules, now I feel like I'm living in the confines of a cage instead of having this reminder of, oh, well, this might be the problem. This is something that I can do about it. And that's one example. That was a personal example for me because I had made so many rules. Generally, when I realize that I'm making rule books for myself, it's not just one hard and fast rule. I make 1,000. So whether for you it's like that, where you're just making one or you're making 100, recognize where it's coming from. And I want you to recognize that when we create rule books like that, just like I said, what we're doing is we're creating out of punishment, we're creating out of fear, and we're actually confining ourselves. So shifting from rule book to anchoring within ourselves, the rule book voice says, if I just follow the rule, then I'll finally be safe. But the anchor voice says, even when I mess up, I can return to myself because I'm already safe in me. It pivots from policing ourselves to returning to ourselves, returning home. If I go back to my example, instead of policing myself and following this checklist and being really hard on myself, I can return back home and I can anchor in and see, oh, instead of controlling outcome, like, let's just touch base. I've kind of been out of tune with connecting, whether it's to myself, to my partner, and I can come back and say, oh, you know what, like, I can understand, tap back into the emotion of it. Whatever it is for you, how can you go from policing to returning? How can you go from controlling to anchoring within yourself? How can you go from earning worth to owning your worth? And it's a subtle shift. You have to get really good at recognizing, when am I just shitting on myself? And when am I accepting my responsibility for something, not going into a shame spiral, and still upholding, I am worthy. I am enough. I made this mistake or I went off track here, but I am still enough. So some examples of these rules, and then maybe how we can turn them into anchors, are rule, I will never trust again. Because maybe that's something that we tell ourselves in the moment when it's extreme. I can't trust anybody. I'll never trust again. And then the anchor is, I anchor into my discernment. I trust myself first. What message am I getting? What do I feel about it? Is this true? Do I trust this person? Can I trust them in the future? Another one, I can't be soft. It gets me hurt. And this is maybe more of a subconscious rule, but that's similar to, I can't let my walls down. That's what gets me hurt. So I'm just going to stay a little bit detached. And the anchor is, I return to my softness as strength. And so that brings it back to my connection with myself, recognizing softness is strength. That's been a lesson for me. And so it's not that I can't be soft, it gets me hurt. It's, what is the lesson telling me, and where can I be soft with myself so that I can work through all of that? That's not saying be soft when grenades are being thrown at you. That's saying step away, return to your softness as a strength, listen to what you need, and you can figure out what to do in those situations. Another rule is, I will never make that mistake again. I will never do this thing again. But the anchor is, I own that mistakes refine me. They don't define me. They refine me. They teach me. I've learned from my mistake. I am still enough. I am still worthy. They don't define me, but they help me grow. And this is where, okay, we can take accountability. If there needs to be an apology, there can. But it doesn't affect my worth. They refine me. They do not define me. What I want to do, because I think going through all of this, it's a really good practice in understanding what arbitrary rule books have we been living by and following and assigning ourselves without even second guessing it or without even questioning it. So I want to go through a few journal prompts that if you're hanging out in your room or even if you're driving, just to think about. Number one, what rules have I been living by to keep myself safe? Number two, what am I trying to police or prevent with these rules? Basically, what is the intent of that rule being there? What purpose does it serve? Number three, what do I lose when I obey them? Do I lose softness? Do I lose freedom? Do I lose creativity? Number four, if I returned to myself, how would this rule shift into an anchor? So how does it go from caging me to supporting me? And when you find these, you can set a little ritual for yourself. And you can write the rule down on a sticky note, on a piece of paper. You can rip it, you can burn it, you can throw it away. And speak your anchor statement instead. So, for example, when I said, I will never do this specific action again, instead I can say, I own that my mistakes refine me, they don't define me. I learned from this lesson. This is the lesson I pulled out of it. And so you can speak that out loud and rip up whatever rule you gave yourself, because you don't have to live by some arbitrary rule book. You would go crazy with all the rules that you've come up with in your entire life. That's a lot. You're going to have to review a book before you interact with anybody. That doesn't make sense. So if you can always come home to yourself and accept the lessons that life is teaching you, you will know. And you can behave and express in your most authentic way. So we said, write down your rule, rip it, burn it, throw it away, speak your anchor statement out loud, and then place your hand on your heart or belly and say, this is who I am, not the rule. And then you close with gratitude and you say, I choose anchoring over policing, and I am grateful for whatever it might be. Even if it's just, and I am grateful for the opportunity to come home to myself and recognize that I was policing myself today. I was trying to control. So you don't need a tighter rule book to heal. You need anchors that bring you back to yourself. And I know it's hard when control has been the thing that's gotten you through so many hard situations, and softness feels impossible. Give yourself the space, find whatever safety that you need, come home to yourself, and try softness again, even if it's just with you, even if it's with nobody else. I hope today was helpful. If you found a rule that you've been living by that you decided to rip up or burn out, put it down in the comments so you can let me know. I want to hear how everybody is learning, growing, and expanding. And I'll see you in the next one.